What's a mystery or unexplained event from your personal life that still baffles you to this day? When I was in 5th grade, I went to science camp on a mountain in California. We had a night hike that was supposed to teach us about the different cells in our eyes, so we did it without any flashlights at all. Our eyes adjusted to just starlight and it was actually pretty cool, until the counselors made us walk a stretch of the path alone, one by one. We were 10, and at least some of us were still afraid of the dark. So I was far too anxious to listen properly to the instructions. One counselor went ahead through the bushes and radioed for the other to start sending kids. My turn comes up, and I drag my feet down the path, until I hit a fork. I vaguely remember the counselor saying something about it. Or was I remembering wrong? Which way was I supposed to go? Was it even a fork or was I just not able to see properly in the dark? Mind you, this was a pitch-black mountain in California with nothing around for miles other than the camp. I didn't want to get lost. I looked behind me, briefly considering going back the way I came to admit that I was a dumbass who didn't listen, but when I turned back to the fork there was a man standing there. He was Asian, wearing wireframe glasses and a white t-shirt. It was barely 50 on the mountain. I wasn't scared, I felt no malice from him. If anything, I was relieved to not be alone in the dark anymore. He gestured for me to go one way, so I did. Rejoined the rest of my class and the counselor radioed to send the next kid. I didn't think anything of it for the rest of the trip. It took me until I was on the bus ride home, reflecting on the hike, to realize that I'd never seen him before. He wasn't one of the counselors leading the hike, he never came out with us, and he never emerged from the bushes after all the kids had done their solo walk. I have no idea who or what he was. When I was 9, my mom put me on a Greyhound bus in the dark at night to travel 1.5 hours to my grandpa's. I am no contact with her today. She was very abusive and I was always being shipped off to places. Anyway, the way my 9-year-old brain computed it, a man came up to us at the bus stop. He was donating blood. He wanted to make sure everything was okay before I boarded. Then we arrived to the town. I start to get off the bus, thinking this was my stop. Suddenly that same man who was donating blood back in the first town is now on my bus, and he stops me. He says, "No, not this stop. Just wait." I stay put, then the bus arrives at the next stop, where my grandpa is actually waiting. That same man says, "Yay, it's this one. Go ahead." I get off and safely greet my grandpa. I'm an atheist now, but I grew up with crazy religion. When I relayed that experience to my parents, they decided it was my guardian angel there in the flesh. Anyway, I never had a suitable explanation for that experience/memory until now. I grew up in Texas, close to Louisiana. I was around 11 and playing on my grandmother's driveway with my little sister and cousin. A bird, or something of the sort, flew over the driveway, which was wide enough for 2 vehicles, and its shadow covered the entire width of the driveway plus several feet on each side. My grandmother began screaming at me to grab the babies. She and I each grabbed a child and ran inside. She was pale and trembling and I asked her what his was. She said she didn't know and had never seen anything that size. My grandmother is very rational and non-dramatic. To this day, I'm not sure what flew over her driveway. I think about it once a month. My mom and I were driving down a familiar road we usually take. At the stop sign my mother went to turn when we both flinched hard. She, driving, looked at me and we both asked if we just felt something go through us. There were no cars around, nothing in street view. To this day it still gives me chills. Once in college I went to a street pub crawl with a buddy, his friend, and his friend's GF in one car. It's night and we parked near a very creepy older buildings and joked about how scary it was. So we go to the pub crawl and have a fun time. A few hours later we walk back to the car. We're all in happy drunk mode except for my buddy's friend, he's driving. We see the creepy old building again and began to crack jokes. Then, out of nowhere, I feel this feeling of pure dread. Like every happy thought I ever had was gone, sunk, dead. And I look at the other 3 people, 2 of whom I don't know well, and have a look of horror on their faces like we all felt the same thing simultaneously. Without a word we all hurry to the car, drive off. When we're far enough we try to laugh it off again, but the mode in the car never returns back to the light-hearted vibe of earlier. I got sepsis and went into septic shock from an E. coli infection. I almost died. I spent a month in the ICU. Doctors tried to control the infection with 4 meds for a few weeks but were losing me, so they had to slice me down the middle and clean me out. I woke up with 5 golf ball-sized open wounds on my stomach. I almost fainted when they made me see them. I knew I couldn't care for them and I could risk being reinfected. They said I could wait a week and be stapled up in the OR or do it awake bedside. I did it awake bedside watching Housewives to distract myself so I could go home for Christmas. I came out with 52 staples down my stomach, and doctors, 4 teams, could never figure out what I ate that almost killed me. To this day I have no idea. It kind of haunts me. My uncle is a pilot and wanted to take me and my grandparents to my cousin's college graduation when I was 13. We were all waiting at the small airport outside when he touched down on a single-engine 4-seater plane. Don't know the real name of it. When he landed, I immediately got a gut punch/stomach-dropping feeling. I wasn't scared of flying, but something inside me told me that something was wrong/off. I don't know if he landed funny or what because nobody else seemed to react the way I did, but I had a very hard time shaking that uneasy feeling. We all loaded into the plane and took off. Not even a minute or two passes by and we're now high above the tree levels when suddenly the engine stalls. I didn't realize it right away, but noticed that something was again wrong and noticed my uncle was intently focusing on turning the plane around. That's when I saw the engine had stopped. In a blink of an eye we bank hard and start nosediving down. I closed my eyes and said my goodbyes to myself and we all silently went down. There was a loud crash/noise and I felt my whole body snap forward and back and I saw a flash. Next thing I know I feel like I'm okay and so I open my eyes and see that I'm alive. I very quickly gather my wits about me and check on everyone else and everyone seems to also be alive. I look out the window because I hear something to my side and see the gas pouring out. I shake my uncle and tell him we need to get out now and he springs into action and unbuckles his seatbelt as do one and one start asking if everyone is okay. My grandparents are in shock, but responsive and we reach over and swing the door open and get everyone out. We start walking away from the plane and see an ambulance arriving at the same time. People had seen the crash and called 911. The entire plane was destroyed, wings snapped off, nose smashed, tail broken, and yet the area we were sitting in was completely intact. My uncle and I were okay. We had a massive bruise later on where the seatbelt had held us, and I had a small headache. My grandpa was fine too and my grandma had like 2 broken ribs, but otherwise okay. Still to this day don't know how my gut knew something bad was going to happen. Biggest mystery of my life besides the fact that we survived something catastrophic like that. I have a memory in black and white. Just one memory. I was about 8 years old, at my grandma's house. My aunt and uncle were there with their son, my cousin, about the same age as me. They lived far away and I had never met him. In fact, after this visit, I never saw them in person again. Me and the cousin were running around the house, playing, normal stuff. We ran into my grandma's room. All of a sudden, the color went out of everything. The world turned black and white. A chill ran all over my body. It was freezing in there. Then the cousin grabbed my arm, and bit me. I shoved him away, really hard. He flew back onto the bed. I ran out of the room screaming. My grandma was there asking me what's wrong. I was crying a little, but not because of the bite alone. I had been in scraps with kids before, this wasn't going to make me cry. I was legitimately scared. Everything was so strange. I kept blinking my eyes, and slowly the color came back to the world. I always think about this, and wonder what the hell happened, and if anyone else ever experienced anything like this. Did everything go black and white, or is that just my memory? Somewhere around 8 years ago I was living at home with my parents. There has been a really bad rotten egg smell coming from the garage downstairs for almost a week and we couldn't figure out what was causing it. My mom started getting sick from it and decided she wasn't sleeping in the house anymore. We tried cleaning out the floor drains, and looking around for any chemicals that could have spilled and couldn't find anything. I went to bed one night and had a dream where my deceased grandfather told me to take the charger off the battery. It didn't make sense when I woke up, but I went right into the garage and saw that my dad had an old motorcycle battery hooked up to a trickle charger. The battery had gone bad and was releasing toxic hydrogen sulfide fumes throughout the entire house. In 2008 I was driving by myself down a dark interstate highway in PA late at night when one of the map lights turned on by itself in my Nissan Xterra. I turned it off and it turned back on. So this really got my attention. About 2 minutes later I see an entire herd of deer in the middle of the road in front of me and I have to stop to avoid hitting them. I'm fairly certain had that map light not turned on I would have been zoned out and plowed into the deer at 65 miles per hour. I never had a map light turn on by itself before or after that occurrence. Many years ago I was hiking with my family. The place we were at had two trails that were parallel to each other, one higher and one lower by a creek. We were on the lower trail. A kid on the higher trail kept throwing rocks, which triggered off a rock slide. There was a large boulder about the size of a medium-sized beach ball roaring down a hill towards us. It was moving so fast that it smelled like gunpowder. My mom and brother turned back and ran, while I ran forward because something told me that if I ran back with them, there wouldn't be enough time for me to not get hit by the boulder. While running out of the way, I got pushed forward by something and fell over, but when I was falling, I saw myself from behind outside of my body. Then, I was back in my body. I still think about this often and still have no explanation for it. One of my brothers and I remember this as clear as day. Our older two brothers were at camp, math or robotics, they're nerds, and our neighbor was watching us as our parents had to leave abruptly. She turned the TV on and started to flip through pages of magazines. My brother said he needed to use the restroom and somehow didn't come downstairs for a while, and so I went looking for him. I found him having a conversation with our grandma in the guest bedroom. I was surprised to see her cause I didn't know she was visiting us that day. The neighbor called out our names and so we told our grandma that we'd see her later and went downstairs. Our parents had just walked in and the neighbor was telling them what we did that evening and then she left. My brother goes, "We didn't even know grandma was home this whole time." Our parents look at us visibly shaken and then they proceed to tell us that they were at the hospital where grandma passed. I am 38 and my brother is in his 40s. To this day we swear it was true. We saw our grandma and talked to her at her home while she lay on her deathbed at the hospital. It's been 30 years since she passed. As a kid, I was woken up by the phone ringing, and saw my grandma sitting on the foot of my bed. She lived pretty far away, so it was weird for her to just show up. She said she just missed me and wanted to say hi, and we chatted for a little while. I don't remember what we talked about. My parents were on the phone in the kitchen, and when they got off the phone and turned the light off she said goodnight and told me to go back to sleep. In the morning they told me that my grandpa had called during the night to tell them that she had passed away. Someone stalked/pranked our household for about 3 years when I was younger. My family would get waves of strange occurrences like being followed by a white car, strange phone calls, doorbell ringing or knocks on windows very late at night, someone clearly camping out in these big hollowed-out bushes we had in our backyard. The last occurrence I'm aware of in this multi-year string of harassment was someone entered our locked home one morning while I was in the bathroom getting ready for middle school. They came right up to the bathroom door and jiggled the door handle to get in. Luckily the door was locked. I could hear the person stand there for a solid minute before walking away and leaving the house. Everyone else was asleep, I know because I checked before I went to the bathroom to get ready, and was sound asleep when I ran to my mom's room after the stranger left to get her help. We were never able to figure out who it was or what happened. Wild stuff. Wild scary when I was a child. Cops never believed us or did anything. Now I'm just wildly curious who it was and why. When I was a kid, my sister, 12, and I, 8, went to a movie in our very small town. It was the first time our parents let us go to an evening movie by ourselves. We agreed to meet our parents outside of the movie theater afterwards. This was in early 90s. The movie got out earlier than anticipated, so we hung outside for a while. We noticed a man appear across the street from the railroad tracks/depot. He made his way directly across the street from us, just staring at us. The movie theater was already closed so we couldn't go back in or use the phone. We got scared and decided to quickly walk a few blocks away. He followed us, keeping a half-block distance. We panicked and ran into the nearest building that had unlocked doors. It was a USPS building. It was at night so of course wasn't staffed, just open to access the P.O. box area. He made his way directly outside of the building so we were effectively blocked in. We were on the verge of a complete breakdown when my mom's car lights appeared down the street. Once he saw the lights, he hurried off. I guess it's not much of a mystery, more of a how bad would that have been if my mom was another 10 minutes. A couple of weeks after my mom died, I was driving home from work, feeling very sad. And a bit angry. I was pissed off at the universe for leaving me alone. I have no other living family left, she was the last. I was thinking about how we both love birds, and would always point them out to each other. I thought, if all that hippie spirituality stuff mom loved is real, then the least she could do is send me a bird, maybe, as a kind of sign. It was a long drive, and I saw no birds at all. I thought, of course it isn't real. What a silly thing to think. I didn't see so much as a robin, or a wren, or anything. I parked and walked down the path to my house. While I was putting my key in the door, something colorful caught my eye. I turned. There at the end of the path was the most astonishing bird I've ever seen. Every color of the rainbow, a bright yellow/gold head, scarlet chest, iridescent blue back, orangey/gold wings, black striping. It was jaw-dropping. It was the size of a chicken, but a bit taller, with a long tail. It just stood staring at me. I started to laugh, and it got spooked and flapped away over the fence. I lived in a large city, which made it even weirder. My neighbor came outside and saw it too, so it wasn't an hallucination. I got into the house and started Googling colorful birds of that size and shape, and eventually found it. It was a Chinese golden pheasant. WTF? There were no bird sanctuaries or zoos nearby. I never saw it again. I took it as my mom, rolling her eyes at my cynical rejection of her hippie spirituality stuff, saying, "You want to see a bird? I'll send you a bird." It was so great. Oh, also, once the police knocked on my door. My dad had called for a welfare check because a girl who sounded like me had left a message on his answering machine sobbing for her dad's help, and he couldn't get through on our line. Back when it was a landline, I was just being a dumb middle schooler and staying on the phone for hours. I have always worried about her. I've told this on Reddit a couple years ago, just in case it sounds familiar. We live in a small town, and my daughter and I were making a quick trip to get some crickets for her gecko. The store's at the end of the road, about 2 city blocks from a park. On the way there, the entire length of the park was road construction. It was bad. Saturday, there was a traffic director, cones, etc. Got to the pet store. I waited in the car and she ran in, got crickets, came out. Less than 5 minutes. The only way to get home was through the construction, and we were complaining how it sucked, but it was gone. Zero sign of there ever being construction there. She and I are still completely baffled. Not me but my cousin. After my mother died in Australia, her sisters wanted some of her ashes to put in a special place in England they had been evacuated to and spent many years there. A year later I went back and a cousin and I went to the site. Very rural, small house, fields, a stream, so we stood at the side of the house and I watched these various aged kids run to the stream and carry water back to a mud village they were building and talking to each other. A baby pram outside the back door, washing on a line. Small outhouse. I could see it all, cousin couldn't. She freaked out while I was describing it all. One of my aunts confirmed to her that yes, they did that. One of my earliest memories is being in a Blockbuster looking at the back wall of new releases. I was there with a bunch of teammates for a slumber party a few towns over. I was looking at the wall of movies and suddenly has this weird deja vu feeling that the boy standing to my left was going to come up and talk to me and tell me about a movie I was looking at. I hadn't seen his face yet in real life, but I saw it in the vision, if you will. After the deja vu passed, the boy turned and did exactly that. His face was the same as what I had just seen in my head. He picked up a movie that had Rosie O'Donnell on the cover and told me that I should check out that one because he saw it the weekend before and it was really good. He was a few years older than me and a really cute, so of course I grabbed it from his hand and said a quick thanks and ran to my friends, completely freaked out at what just happened. I never had deja vu or anything like that happen again. Fast forward 12 years later and I was standing in the same Blockbuster with my then boyfriend who I met in college. He had grown up in that same town and I was spending the night for the first time at his parents' house. We had been dating for a little over a year at that time. We were browsing together and trying to agree on a movie and he started telling me this story of how he scared a little girl while trying to be nice at that same Blockbuster when he was younger. I immediately had a weird fuzzy feeling and asked him if the movie had Rosie O'Donnell on the cover and he looked at me freaked out and said yes it did. After a "there is no way that's possible" discussion in the aisles of Blockbuster, we got our movie and left thinking maybe it was just a weird coincidence because of course it had to be. When I walked into his parents' house, I saw that his mom had gotten out old photo albums for me to see, and sure enough there was the same boy I saw in that Blockbuster. We looked up the Rosie O'Donnell movie that night and it was the same cover we both remembered. We've been married for 15 years, have 4 kids together. Some years ago, I was visiting my grandmother at the nursing home. There was also another old man in the nursing home who was our distant relative. I saw him in the hallway and said hi. Later I asked about him and it turned out that he had died months earlier. He just stopped eating, they said, and he died. Probably I just saw some other old man. But maybe he hadn't moved on. Was driving home one day on a fairly rural 2-lane highway. Suddenly a fireball explodes in midair out of nowhere. It was large, like the size of a 2-story house. Just a flash of fire in a sphere and then gone without smoke a few seconds later. There were 4 other cars close enough to have seen it. All of us pulled off the road. Some got out of their cars. I decided it best not to linger and drove away. No idea to this day. The day my dad had a heart attack was such a weird and wild day for me. I had weird vibes all day at school, left early and went to go home and sleep it off. I got home and napped. A few hours later I woke up and felt sick to my stomach and I had the weirdest feeling that I needed to be with my dad. I drove almost 2.5 hours in Toronto traffic, for those that know. From Toronto to Vaughan to a hockey arena. My dad was playing happily and everything was normal. As he was walking me to the car after his game, he was staying with the guys for a drink. He told me, "Baby girl, I don't feel well," and my father had never called me that before. 5 seconds later he collapsed flat, dead. 210 pounds of dead weight crashing right down on top of me. I screamed and yelled and a few people came rushing out of the arena and started CPR, and got an AED and were able to administer life-saving results, with the assistance of the paramedics as well. 45 minutes later he was transferred to another hospital for 2 surgeries and survived both of those too. I still have no idea what told me to go be with him or go to that arena, to be there, to witness, to help, to catch him before he fell. But weird to me. When I was in 5th grade, a friend gifted me a hardcover copy of all 3 Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark volumes in one book. This book quickly became my most prized possession, so I wrote my name inside the front cover just in case I ever lost it at school. At some point I took my book with me to my dad's house for the weekend, which is in another city about an hour away from where I lived with my mom. I had left it at my dad's house that weekend and I guess I just forgot to ever bring it back home with me. Well, eventually my dad moved into a new home and I figured my book mistakenly got thrown out. I was very sad about it but accepted my reality. Lol. Fast forward a few years to 8th grade. I make a new friend in one of my classes and we become very close very fast. I was hanging out at his house one day and decided to look through the books on his bookshelf. I see a copy of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, the same one I had that contained all 3 books in one. I pull it out saying to my friend, "Wow, I used to have a copy of this too, no way." I opened the front cover and right there at the top was my name, exactly how I wrote it back in 5th grade. My friend had absolutely no recollection of where that book came from. So I essentially grew up in the woods. I live in the middle of nowhere, and spent more time in the forest than I did out of it. My whole family would go to my grandparents every weekend, and they had a huge property mostly made up of a forest that me and my cousins played in all the time. We all knew the woods pretty well and from a fairly early age we'd all be allowed to explore by ourselves as the likelihood of getting lost was slim to none, especially if we stayed on the trail. Within these woods was a cabin that my family had built together, and it was common for us to all go there to hang out. It wasn't super deep in the woods, and the way there was almost a straight shot, aside from one turn near the entrance of the forest behind my grandparents' house where you had to cross a bridge to get over a deep ravine, and then turn left. After that first left turn you walk straight on the trail and you end up at the cabin. It was a walk that I must have made at least 1,000,000 times before I turned 10. It was decently common for there to be one group of people at the cabin, and another group back at the house, and one day when I was about 10ish exactly this happened. I was with the group at the cabin, and decided I wanted to head back to the house, and so I started on the walk. I remind you, it was almost impossible to get lost on this walk, but when I got to where I should have turned the corner and seen the bridge in the back of the house, I only saw the bridge. Past the bridge was just more woods. I was extremely confused, and honestly pretty scared cause no matter how much I tried to tell myself I must have taken a wrong turn that just didn't make sense. There were no other bridges in my grandparents' woods, and there's no way I could have accidentally crossed into a neighbor's property in that short of a walk. Even if I had somehow taken a wrong turn on a walk where I stayed on a straight trail and somehow didn't notice, I knew these woods very well and everything around and behind me suggested that across that bridge should have been my grandparents' house. But somehow it wasn't there. I was not crossing that bridge. Absolutely not. I turned around and walked back to the cabin, and again I'm almost certain I couldn't have taken a wrong turn cause the walk back to the cabin was identical to the walk from my grandparents' house to the cabin. When I got to the cabin, no one believed me when I recounted what happened. They assured me I just got lost somehow, and in fact my mom was mad that I didn't tell anyone I was leaving, and then was careless enough to get lost. When I brought up the fact that was impossible because I saw the bridge, and there's no other bridges in the woods, they said I was lying to get out of trouble. This is only one of many weird stories I have that took place in these woods, and it's one of the ones I don't bring up with family anymore as they still believe I was lying, or they don't even remember it so they dismiss it as a dream. I know it wasn't a dream. Still can't explain what it was though. Something happened to me and a friend when we were 16. There's a patch of ancient woodland near her childhood home. Ancient woodland in the UK means remnants of the forests that used to cover most of the country before humans got involved. She went there nearly every day to climb trees and read. We went out there on a full moon at midsummer, just chatting and joshing around like you do. Anyway, something starts making noise in the undergrowth. Slow, deliberate noise. Too big for a house cat or even a badger or a dog. We freak out and head back. We followed the exact same path back. We weren't even that far into the woods. Climbed over the stile and found ourselves in a village 2 miles away. We ended up running through the twilight murk crossing farmers' fields with signs saying trespassers will be shot. Whatever was following us kept pace the whole way, until we broke the hedge line and made it onto the roads. Still have no idea WTF was going on there. It was so surreal afterwards. The only way I can ever conceptualize it was that something in those woods was messing with us. My husband and I were coming back home after college and he turned to look into our next door neighbor's patio. It was piled to the top of the fence with years of junk and garbage. He loudly exclaimed that it was a fire hazard. He huffed and started going on about a negligent HOA, and how they would hate to have to pay to fix everything. It wasn't something he'd ever brought up before. I had honestly never even thought of it as a fire hazard. Just a nuisance. He refused to sleep. ASMR wasn't working. He had intense anxiety all night. I fell asleep first, but I'm guessing he eventually did too. We woke up to our dog screaming at flames at 4 a.m. She saved everyone's lives. Our neighbors had gone out to smoke at 10 p.m. and both threw their cigs into their junk pile, as they had done for years. But that is the time it went up in flames. I later asked him about why he had announced it was a fire hazard just hours before the fire. He shrugged and told me that something felt wrong. A few months later during finals week, he woke me up in the middle of the night and demanded I take my final test right then. He would not take no for an answer. He woke his brother up and made us both coffee. He then monitored us and made sure we had everything submitted and every test taken. He let us go back to sleep at around 6 a.m. I thought he was just being a dickhead. But when we were all fully awake at a normal hour he just shrugged and told me that he had a gut feeling and that it hadn't gone away yet. Hours later, I was gaming when the Wi-Fi cut out. The same neighbors who had started the fire cut our Wi-Fi wires with our stolen gardening shears. He was grinning at us from his patio. He asked us how our finals were going. It took 2 weeks for them to fix the wires and for us to have working Wi-Fi again. My husband saved all of our grades that day. I woke up with black fingerprint smudges on my arms periodically for a few months. I am a very clean person. My sheets were clean, often freshly washed because I was so confused. My clothes were clean. They'd wash off in the shower. No idea. Was someone trying to murder me? If so, was it someone I knew or were these things random acts and I simply had horrible luck, but came out alive? I was separated from a vengeful person who desperately wanted to get our children in the divorce. I had borrowed a friend's truck to move my belongings out of the house we were selling in the divorce. The truck was parked at my then boyfriend's house for a few days before I returned it to the owner. On the way to return the truck, it was making a horrible noise but I didn't stop to check things out. Simply parked it in the drive and left. He wasn't home. Later that evening, He called and asked me if I knew of anyone who'd want to harm me. I was alarmed. He told me all the lug nuts had been removed from one of the front tires. I was fortunate I didn't lose a tire on the 5-mile drive to his house. Fast forward 2 years, I'd moved into my own house, divorced 2 years / single again. Was dead asleep at 04:00 and my fire alarm went off, waking me and my 2 young children. My house was on fire. After getting out with little more than the clothes on our backs, the entire home became engulfed. An arsonist had set fire to my back deck after pouring gasoline on it. Police never discovered who did it. 22 years later, I still wonder if the events were related and whether it was someone I knew or if I was just a random target. On multiple occasions spanning at least 15 years, I've had people tell me I had been speaking fluent Spanish in my sleep. Took some classes sporadically in school, but I've never been fluent, barely conversational level, in waking life. I was talking about this with my girlfriend the other day. When I was in my early 20s, I lived on the 3rd floor on an apartment complex. One night, midnight-ish, I think, I got woken up by knocking / doorbell ringing on my front door. When I answered it, there was a blonde girl in a yellow dress at my front door. She said, "Hey!" as though she knew me. I did not recognize her then, and I cannot remember her face now. I asked her if she was okay, and she seemed vaguely confused. I remember trying to make it clear that I had just woken up and my vision was blurry, but also that I didn't recognize her. She started crying and took off. I tried to get her to wait, but I had to run back to my room to put actual clothes on before I could follow her. I'm willing to answer my door at 12 a.m. in only my boxers, because hey, you knocked. But I'm not going to be the dude chasing an upset, possibly drunk girl around in only my underwear. Anyway, by the time I got out to the apartment complex proper, she was gone. I just want to know who it was. No clue, to this day. No one I knew well at the time had blonde hair, and none of my casual acquaintances should have known my full address. Shrug. My brother's football team practices behind a church. Me being little, I'd go explore to pass the time. Well, there was a fence that divided the church property from the neighboring houses. Me and my other brother would sneak over the fence sometimes. We found a house that no one lived in. There was a pool in the backyard that was overtaken by nature. Literal fish were in there along with frogs. Anyways, one practice I wandered to the backyard of the abandoned house. I jumped the fence and witnessed like 15 nuns in the backyard standing there with their heads down. It looked like they were praying or something. The one nun in front looked right at me and started yelling in a different language. I found it odd how she looked right at me as if sensing me before seeing me. As she yelled at me, the rest of the nuns kept their heads down, still praying. I jumped back over, scared shitless of getting in trouble. When I peeked back over, not seconds later, they were all gone. I'm sure it could be explained away, but it was such an odd sight. Where did my Fitbit go? I had one of those early 2010s Fitbits. The little kind, maybe like 1 centimeter long, that fit into a wristband. I had to take it out to charge it. I lived in a studio apartment. One day I plugged my Fitbit into the charger. When I went to put it back on, it was gone. I never found it, even when I moved out of that apartment and cleaned the shit out of the place. Some say it's still out there. Had an ex come to my apartment who I shared with a buddy she never met. My roommate would have nightmares about this creepy dude. My GF woke up the next morning and she said she had a weird dream that someone came into my room last night. She described the guy my roommate had nightmares about. My husband and I were in the house we had just moved into a few weeks ago, just watching TV and chilling. We suddenly heard a sound. Sounded like a single pure note of music, very similar to if someone had struck a single piano key and held it until it ran out. It came from an indeterminate spot in the house. We quickly paused the TV and were both looking at each other like, "Did you just hear that?" We looked all over and tried finding what could have made that sound. We probably looked crazy, spending half an hour tapping stuff, trying to recreate that sound. It was so unlike anything I had heard before. We even asked our friends that used to live in the home if they'd heard anything like that while there, and they said no. Our running theory is that a dish managed to slide just right in the sink and strike another dish just right and made that sound, but we heard no other sounds like dishes sliding or clanging. Still gives me the chills sometimes when I remember how goddamn weird that was. Been in the house for over 4 years now and never heard it again. I lived in an apartment during my sophomore year of college with 2 friends. Most nights we'd watch TV together before we went to bed. I normally fell asleep during this, and they'd just turn the TV and lights off when they went to bed. I'd wake up an hour or two later on the couch in the dark and go to my room. One night, I woke up and was surprised that my one roommate was still up. The TV and lights were still on. I cannot remember one word of it, but we had a long conversation and eventually I had to use the bathroom and told her I'd be right back. My bathroom was down a hallway that connected to the living room so you could see the living room from the end of the hallway and vice versa. I used the bathroom real quick, stepped back into the hallway, turned to the living room, and stopped dead. The TV and lights were off and my roommate was gone. For some reason, I was just struck with this very intense feeling that something was wrong. I know the rational thought here would just be that she went to bed after I left. That's not where my mind went. I immediately felt that something was off and the feeling was so intense that I couldn't even bring myself to walk back to the living room. I went to bed and that's where I woke up the next morning. I talked to my roommates when we ate breakfast and casually asked the one why she went to bed when I said I was coming back to keep talking after I went to the bathroom last night. She was really confused and asked me what I was talking about. Both of them said that I fell asleep on the couch like normal and they went to bed after shutting the lights and TV off a little while later. The one I spoke to said that she fell asleep in her room and didn't stay up or come back out or talk to me at all. I know the obvious answer here would be that I dreamed it all. The problem is, they left me asleep on the couch. I woke up in my bed the next morning. The only time I remember going to bed is after I had that conversation with my roommate. I don't sleepwalk and never have. The creepier thing to me is remembering that night. Everything about that conversation and the way my roommate looked feels wrong in hindsight. Everything is just slightly off. When I woke up, she was on her couch which was 90 degrees off from mine on the other wall. She wasn't watching the TV or on her phone. She was just staring at me. I remember everything from that interaction vividly except what we talked about. The way she moved and talked doesn't feel right, but at the time I didn't notice anything. I thought it was all totally normal, other than being surprised she hadn't gone to bed yet. And I don't understand why, because I thought it was normal. I had such a strong feeling that something was wrong when I saw the dark living room instead of assuming she went to bed. I am 100% sure I did not dream this occurrence. I can't think of any reason she would have lied about it. I find it extremely unlikely that I sleepwalked while dreaming and that's how I made it to bed. To this day, I have a sick feeling when I think about that night and I can't explain it for the life of me. It's the creepiest experience of my life and I moved into a haunted apartment after that one. None of the scary stuff tops the way I felt when I saw the empty living room. I was 16 and had just experienced my first real loss. My grandma had passed away after a battle with breast cancer. She and I were very close and I was having a hard time with grief. On top of that, my dad is an alcoholic and had relapsed about a month after her funeral. He's okay now and is going on 4 years sober. I was in my room. It was somewhere between 1 o'clock to 3 a.m. on a school night and I had been up crying about my grandma and my dad, and I just could not fall asleep. I flip over in my bed and all of a sudden I get a strong whiff of my grandma's perfume. Not just a little, but like someone had taken her perfume and sprayed it right next to my head. No one else is awake, and we didn't have any of my grandma's perfume anywhere in the house. I felt like all the grief and anxiety just kinda drained from my body and I instantly fell asleep. The next day my dad sat us down and told us he was going to rehab and starting AA. I don't believe in ghosts and I'm not religious, but I truly believe my grandma visited my house that night to tell me everything was going to be okay. It was an average Monday, and I had just finished vacuuming the house, where I live alone. I carried the vacuum down the hallway to put it away in the spare bedroom, then grabbed a duster and started dusting. Now, in the spare bedroom's closet, there is a hatch in the ceiling that leads, presumably, to some sort of insulation space. I had lived in the house for only a few months at that point, and there had been some odd occurrences that had made me wonder, jokingly, if there was somebody living up there, crawl space style, coming down at night to mess with things. So on this particular day I decided to see. I shouted at the hatch, things like, "Hey, I know you're up there. And come out here. Don't make me come get you." I finished up with, "I'm going to count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. And at that point, I decided this wasn't worth it, and went back to dusting. Then, I stepped back into the hallway I had just walked through not 60 seconds before, and there was a playing card. Just a single playing card, face down on the floor, lying on top of an Ethernet cord I had stretched down the hallway. and it definitely hadn't been there before. I picked it up and turned it over. It was a 4. The 4 of hearts. To this day, I have no idea how it got there. It freaked me out badly enough that I grabbed a weapon and searched the whole house, found nothing of course. But I have no realistic theories. There's no furniture in the hallway for it to have fallen from. I don't think it could have fallen from the vacuum since I'd used it many times, and there's no way a playing card could have been stuck inside without it getting mangled or at least dirty. There was a painting hanging nearby that I had been messing with earlier that day, but again, no physical place on it for a card to be stuck. I did recognize the card, though. It's from a deck that I owned but hadn't used in a long time, which was safely inside a magnetically closed box, under another box, inside that very closet where I had just been yelling at the ceiling. But how one single card could have made its way out and onto my floor in the brief time between when it wasn't there and then suddenly was. I'm usually pretty good at rationalizing weird things, but this time, I just got nothing. I have a memory of falling down the stairs in the building that I live when I was a kid. But till this day, I don't know if it was real or not. Other moment was that when I was a kid, I was watching Drake and Josh, or some other Nickelodeon sitcom, and they made a joke followed by a background laugh and laughed. But right after, when it was silent, I heard a female laugh near me. The only issue was that there was only me and my mother in the house, but my mom was at her room with door closed and her room was kind far from where I was. I wish I had an explanation for this, because it feels insane, but I have no reason to lie about it, because if anything, saying it happened looks crazier. Was at a sleepover in middle school playing light as a feather, stiff as a board. For anyone unfamiliar, it's a silly, scary slumber party game, like a Ouija board, where you try to do some seance-esque nonsense. Get together, put your hands under someone lying on the floor, close your eyes, chant light as a feather, stiff as a board repeatedly and try to get them to levitate. Dumb, right? A group of about 8 girls and I had been playing to no real avail, obviously, but when it was one girl's turn, Allie Witowicks, if you're out there, back me up, we did the chant, zoned in, and, before long, had this girl over our heads on, I shit you not, just the tips of our fingers. Her fully horizontal body was resting above eye level on 2 fingers on each hand, taking barely any effort or weight. And not only could I see that everyone else was only using 2/3 fingertips max, if not holding her over their head, I was easily both the tallest and strongest person there. No one could have been lifting her alone under the circumstances. Once she got to a certain height, someone got freaked out, screamed, and her total weight fell on us. We had to stick our arms out and catch her, where she'd been at the same level effortlessly just a few seconds earlier. While I don't have a single scientific explanation, we did live in the woods in rural/old-timey New England, in an area where there were certainly colonial-era battles, issues with settlers, indigenous burial grounds, etc. Needless to say, didn't mess with incantations much after that. I went to visit my sister over spring break one year, and when I came back my best friend refused to speak with me. We spoke on the phone for a few hours midway through my trip and things were fine. I asked a mutual friend who said she said, "You know what you did?" I have no clue. We were super tight and generally able to call each other on our shit. I wasn't a perfect friend, so this isn't about not accepting something I did was wrong. I genuinely don't know and it will always gnaw at me. My father passed unexpectedly when I was 12 years old. Years later, in my early 20s, I had a very vivid dream. I dreamt that we discovered there was a special landline telephone in a room that we could use to call the deceased. When you listened through the earpiece of the phone, it was a static sound, but you could faintly hear the deceased person talking. In my dream I of course wanted to call my dad. I could hear his voice the same as I always remembered it, and he said, "I want you to know that I'm okay and that I love you. Please tell our family that I'm okay." I woke up and my face was wet with tears. It was the most vivid dream I have ever felt. It felt real and not like a dream at all. Came across an old lady in Tesco who kept staring at me. She came over and said, "I know you." I said, "No, I do not think we have ever met." She said, "No, I really do know you." She said, "This will sound crazy to you, but you were my dog in another life, and one day 3 vicious dogs attacked you and you severely injured your right leg. You had to be put down." Then I remembered the birthmark that I had on my right leg that looks like a long scar running from the thigh down to the calf. So my roommate was possessed. Or something. She has these weird not seizures. We have no idea what they are. They've run tests on her while it's happening. How we know it's not seizures, not electrical, but everyone is mystified. When they started, it was horrifying. She was conscious, but not her. She would randomly laugh, grab her tongue and pull it, writhe, make sounds. She's a tiny thing and kicked 2 EMTs, one across the room. She would grab me and stare at me, gripping so tight it wound, bruise and break skin. This is not someone who would ever fake these things. She had to quit her job because they would happen at work, and she worked a job where that couldn't happen. The scariest one I remember, she went to take a bath, and an hour later we realized the water had never poured. We went to check, and when we opened the door it banged into something and wouldn't open. We called out to her, and she started giggling and slowly scratching her nails down the door. She was standing in front of the door, had been for most of that hour. She giggled and scratched until we managed to push her back enough to get her. But the scariest part, besides a loved one having some intense, neurological condition nobody can pin down, was when we moved. See, the apartment we were in had bad vibes. I called it haunted, but clearly some bad stuff had gone down there. The door had been kicked in at some point, we found cocaine in the drains, the cops came by several times our first year there looking for missing people. There were a lot of strange sounds, strange things happening unrelated to Rumi's issue. When we moved back to my house, 100% boringly non-haunted, the not seizures didn't stop. But she never again has had that weird other personality. She's either herself and aware or sorta twilight conscious. No giggling, no weird activities, no strange sounds, everything else is exactly the same, but there's no personality changes. Besides wanting to know just WTF is happening, please give me medical advice. It's solicited. I want to know what moved into her body when she wasn't home. I typed this down a while back. I have another one about a man who disappeared out of thin air. I remember when I was a little kid, my dad showed me this app on his phone which connected to the camera he installed at our place. It showed the living room and dining room. The app lets you move the camera around different angles. We were eating at a restaurant when he showed this to me. He also showed me the view of the camera installed at his office too. However, something was off with this one. I saw some weird figure that obviously shouldn't be there. It was some white figure, standing and looking straight at the camera. If I had to say what it looked like, I'd say it looks like one of those Triple K outfits. He was holding something on his hand too. I showed this to my dad and I guess he was a little confused, too. I don't remember what he said or how he reacted, but my guess would be that he was worried or something. Not sure though. When we switched cameras the thing was still there. Weird thing was, it never moved at all. Just stared into the camera. Around age 8 I woke up in the middle of the night and there was a woman crouched down on the opposite side of my room facing away from me. My parents always left my door cracked open and the hallway light on so I could see her clearly. At first I thought she was my mom and I almost asked her what she was doing, but when she turned around I realized she was not my mother. She had very, very short blonde hair, big blue eyes, and she was wearing a light pink sweatsuit and white tennis shoes. We lived in a secluded area by a forest and down a dirt road with only a few neighbors. We knew all of our neighbors and she was not one of them. My parents always locked the doors and checked the window locks before they went to bed, and we had a dog that would have whined if a stranger came in, so I don't know how this woman got in our house. She was there for a long time and I know I was awake because the entire time my heart felt like it was beating out of my chest, and I've still never been so afraid in my life some 30 years later. I was too afraid to call for my parents, whose bedroom was just on the other side of the wall, because I thought she would hurt them. I didn't sleep properly for years because the experience had terrified me that much. To this day I know in my heart she was a real person, but I don't understand what she was doing there or how she got in. She was just taking her time and looking at all the random junk on my bedroom floor, toys and Easter baskets that we had left lying about, nothing interesting to a normal adult, and she was getting real close and checking on me and my sister, in the bunk bed above, to see if we were asleep. I pretended to be asleep. Was this a crazy woman who just stumbled into our house? Eventually she left the room and I fell back asleep and didn't wake up until about 5 a.m. when my father got up for work. All these years later I wonder how she got in without being heard and what she was doing. Why would you wear a pink sweatsuit and white shoes to break into someone's house? I just can't figure it out. I'd love to hear theories. Add on. By the way, when I told my parents the next morning, I think they were horrified but told me that I must have been dreaming. Years later they confessed that the whole thing majorly creeped them out, and the fact that I couldn't sleep for years made them extra suspicious that it wasn't a dream. I would wake up every night at like 3 a.m. and ask to sleep on the floor next to their bed for like 2 years, and I'd just lay there listening to every creak the house made for what seemed like an hour every night. My mom and I don't talk on the phone much. She doesn't live very far away. One afternoon, I got a notification that there had been a mass shooting at a local mall. It wasn't particularly near her house, it was actually closer to mine. For some reason, I felt this overwhelming urge to call her and tell her not to go to that particular mall. However, I only got her voicemail, and left a message. She called me back, because I usually only call her if it's something important, and said that she would call me back later, which I thought was weird. When she called me back later, she asked me why I called and left her that message. And I told her that I just had a weird feeling. As it turns out, she was in the mall with my 2 very young nephews. My phone call is what alerted her that something had gone really bad and they needed to get out of there. Something else happened another time, that was weird like that too, but that time, both my son and I called her within 2 or 3 minutes of each other. And I'm not one who believes in psychics or fortune telling or anything like that. But I'll never forget that feeling. It was strange. A while back I worked the overnight shift and would fall into a really deep sleep during the day. One day I heard yelling and banging on the front door. We lived in a townhouse and the main bedroom was above the front door, so it was somewhat within view of the window. I remember being in a weird sleep state, trying to get out of bed to see what the hell was going on and look out the window. A large man was banging and kicking the front door. I was scared to death, but as I watched him, the man stopped and turned and left. I assumed he had the wrong house, as my husband and I barely knew anyone in the area. In my weird sleep state I wasn't thinking clearly and was too tired to deal with it, so just got back into bed and went to sleep. When I woke back up I realized I have no idea if that was a dream or real, even though I have a pretty clear memory of it. To this day I have no idea. I vividly remember being on a jet, drinking Ribena, traveling to a place across the country when I was a child. My mother said it never happened, but she remembers something like that from when she was a kid. I remember specific details as well, like that I had to ask someone for help opening the straw on the juice box, but yeah, apparently that never happened to me. Random, but I was building a fire pit. After I get through laying all the stones, I decide to level the ground a bit more. So I removed the stones and put them all in a pile about 5 feet away. I leveled the ground and begin again. As I am finishing I notice I am 1 stone short. On my first attempt I used all stones and it completely closed the circle. On my second attempt, I am 1 stone short. I stacked all the stones literally a few feet away from me. I didn't leave the yard where I was building it. I didn't change the diameter of the ring. WTF? Where the hell did that 1 stone go? My grandfather on my dad's side disappeared. Vanished in 1978. My mom was pregnant with me at the time, so I never met him, of course. He was only declared dead, per law, 7 years later. I remember his memorial service. I could go on and on about the intricacies of this. It seems to be very clear that my grandmother killed him, had him killed, or got him hooked on substances that caused his death. It changed my dad's life. Where he never got over it. He was still a good dad. But it was always this looming thing that haunted us. My dad died of alcoholism at 67 7 years ago, and I have no doubt this was a contributing factor to his lifelong depression, but no one ever knew what happened. I think if there was any finality, a body, a confession, anything, it would have changed our lives for the better. I woke up from a nightmare where terrorists were attacking the Denver airport, so I ran out and hid in a tree. I woke up feeling awful and often have nightmares when sick, so I called out of work, at the FAA in DC. It was the morning of 9/11 and the towers fell an hour later. That nightmare still haunts me. My roommate and I sitting in our living room together on a Thursday night. It was a townhouse, and the only entrance unseen was the front door. The living room was 12 feet in and to the left, with kitchen prior to the right. Only him and I lived there, and we got home at about the same time with myself earlier. We were chilling in the living room with him to my left on the couch watching a movie. A pause in the movie happened, resulting in silence. I've seen this movie several times, and know the exact dialogue thanks to ADHD. In the quiet, a little girl's voice whispered from the hallway behind us, "Hello?" Not in a scary way, more of a greeting to an unknown area. While I tried to make sense of what I heard for several seconds easily, my roommate without looking at me asked, "Did you hear that too?" I don't believe in ghosts, but it still makes my skin crawl to this day. My roommate wasn't the culprit. I've known him now for 25 years, and he's just not the type. That and him being terrified, not in character, as a tough guy sous chef biker. Oh, and I ran into Bigfoot in northern Minnesota with my cousins in 2010 in the largest state park in the state. A few years ago, my dad's cancer spread to his bones and he was made palliative at home. It was a tough time, but my sister and I took comfort, knowing that we would take care of his every need, especially since I'm a nurse and she works admin in a hospital. We understood what he would go through. I was heartbroken, but not anxious that our time with him was coming to an end. Then the nightmares start. Every single night for 5 weeks, I dream that I drive over a bridge, the highway that takes me to my mom's house. Every dream, every night, I can never make it to her house because I crash. I never die, but I'm falling in my car, hit the ground, and then go on with life. In the dream, I don't have anxiety when I wake up, I just wonder why I keep dreaming the exact same scenario every single night. Finally connecting it to just feeling a sense of being out of control of my dad's fate. After 5 weeks of these dreams, one night I feel something else is wrong, but I just can't figure it out. I then get a call that my mom was in the hospital waiting for helicopter transport to a cardiac surgery hospital. She's having a massive heart attack. My nurse brain tells me that everything will be okay since the chopper is on its way to get her. I call the hospital for an update since it was prime COVID time and visitors were not allowed in hospitals. No answer on the phone in the ER. I rationalize this a shift change and it's busy. 30 minutes later I get the call, she passed away. They were doing CPR on her when I called the first time. The helicopter had just landed and she was being transferred to the stretcher to go to the helipad when she crashed. She never liked helicopters, so now mom has passed away and dad is still palliative. They had been divorced for over 30 years, but remained good friends. The night she passed away, I didn't have the car crash dream, and never did again. 3 weeks later, and we have our dad in hospice. I asked the staff if they could shave his face during his daily wash. He was obsessed with not having an unkempt appearance, even in his weakest time. He said he had to be presentable when he meets his maker. Not even 1 minute after they cleaned him up and gave him a shave, he took his last breath. A wave of relief came over me that I have never felt before. After both their passings, I feel as though the dreams were telling me that I couldn't get to my mother because she would no longer be there. She would instead be waiting for my dad, wherever the afterlife would take them. And I would crash in the sense that life was really difficult for some time, but I am doing quite well now. About 20 years ago, I was waiting for a bus in the middle of winter. At the time, I was a 22-year-old punk kid, mohawk, basically just a messy rascal. As I was waiting, this older Middle Eastern man, probably in his mid to late 30s, walked up to the bus stop. He was wearing a blue suit and looked like he was probably an office worker in one of the financial business towers nearby. Basically, we had nothing in common. I can't explain what happened. But the second we saw each other we just stopped and stared at each other, and smiled this really simple, sweet, confused smile at each other, and I have never felt such an overwhelming sensation of, "I know you." Not in my life before or since. And I also know he felt the exact same thing. I recognized him immediately and just knew him. It was a surreal, goosebump kind of feeling. He walked over to stand next to me. We stood smiling at each other for like 5 minutes, not having any idea what to say, before he finally asked, "Do you have the time?" I shook my head no, this was flip phone days, and mine was dead. So we continued to just stand there smiling at each other. I don't think either of us had any idea what the hell was going on, just that we absolutely knew each other. When the bus came, it was empty. We walked on and immediately sat next to each other on this empty bus, and continued just quietly smiling at each other. I was confused as hell, but I've also never felt so at peace to sit next to anyone, let alone a stranger. I should stress, there was nothing sexual about this interaction. It wasn't physical attraction. He was absolutely not hitting on me, there was no weird vibe. It was entirely comfortable. It just felt right. Like, yes, of course we should be sitting here together. I know you. This feels good to sit here like this with you. His stop came after 5 or 6 minutes, and when he got up he just said, "Maybe I will see you here again." I nodded. He got off the bus, then stood to watch it go as we waved goodbye to each other. I never saw him again, but I can never forget it. I think about him all the time. Look, I'm an agnostic and don't believe in reincarnation whatsoever, but this event is the one thing that makes me wonder. It was a really overpowering feeling of comfort and familiarity and recognition with this person, despite that we had absolutely nothing in common and no reason to interact at all. Staring up into the night sky, I watched what I thought was star sitting still slowly move about the width of the moon and stop. It stayed there for less than a minute. I pointed it out to two others that were with me and we watched do about the same thing in other directions 2 more times. This was in 1992. Almost 40 years ago, my husband and I were sharing an apartment with another couple. I was about 6 months pregnant. The other couple were also expecting, she was due any day. One night I dreamed that her husband came home and walked up the stairs to the bathroom. I was just coming out of the bedroom and met him in the hall. He said, "Guess what? Christine had a girl and she weighs 7 pounds." The next morning, I was coming out of my bedroom and the other husband was walking up the stairs towards the bathroom. He said, "Guess what?" And I said, "Christine had a girl and she weighs 7 pounds." He was floored. My husband and I had gone to bed early the night before and didn't even know that the other couple had gone to the hospital. A couple of months later, I dreamed the entire labor and delivery of my own daughter 2 weeks before I had her. It happened exactly as I dreamed it. Apparently, I only have this power when I'm pregnant. I haven't had another prophetic dream since. Was on a phone call while driving at night. I made a U-turn somewhere but in the middle of it dropped my phone and had stopped in the road. Thing is, there was a car that was oncoming that I had just enough time to avoid if I kept going. But I had stopped and when I looked up after instinctively grabbing my phone I saw no cars whatsoever on the road. About 8 years ago I was working as a manager at a group home. Now one Friday, staff came in and I had to work late. The house I was in had an extra room so sometimes I would sleep there if I had a late night and was too tired to drive home. So this day, same thing. I went to the back room and fell asleep. The night staff guy had come. Now mind you, I was supposed to be gone and had no interaction with the staff after clocking out. I fell asleep at about 11 p.m. Now you know what a vivid lucid dream is. It is the craziest thing to happen to you if you have ever had one. I was deep asleep and I heard someone tell me, "Wake up." I ignored it. "Wake up." I woke up really surprised. Shocked I might add. And confused. I look at the clock. 3:14 a.m. So I wake up to go get me some Hot Pockets and something to drink as I hadn't eaten dinner. I walk to the kitchen and turn on the light. One of our residents is on the ground, choking. Now a little background on him. He was nonverbal, with high mental issues. He had a condition known as trismus where his jaw only opened about halfway. Meaning he was a high choke risk and the damn night staff was passed out sleeping on the couch in the living room. He is not allowed to get near any food as he doesn't chew and swallows only. He had woken up and wandered into the kitchen with his food-seeking behaviors. Dude is on the ground choking. He had stuffed his mouth full of bread. I immediately start CPR while trying to get the mouth dislodged. He had gone limp. I shout for the night staff who wakes up confused. Initiate 911. By luck, the piece of bread comes out when I did the compressions. I lay him on his side, recovery. Paramedics come and take him to hospital. Until today it makes me shudder. It is about a 4-minute window for someone to die from choking on food. How I woke up, I was so tired. What woke me up at that exact time? What made me stay? And usually I left to go play video games and beer on weekends. I was even investigated that I might have done something like hit him or abused him that covered up with choking, but doctors and x-rays showed he definitely choked. This was an accused and the night staff tried to distract with because he was being charged with neglect of a vulnerable person by sleeping at the job. I was not supposed to be there that day. What screamed at me to wake up like that, at that very exact time? P.S. It was a thankless job and just so you know, I got nothing for it. The ghost that haunted my house and would come sit on the edge of the bed. Was it my mom? The seemingly other ghost that appeared as a cat to my son, was it the same entity? The dark shadow in the hall, same one? I had a guy over and we felt something sit on the bed, felt the weight of it and the pull on the blanket. I assumed it was my obese cat. Looked, nothing there but could still feel the weight on the bed. That actually happened often enough that I stopped even looking. I asked my son if he saw a dark figure in the hall and he said, "Nope, but a ghost cat hangs out in my room." And then he drew the cat. I think it looked like my childhood cat, but, ugh. I know that the more you mull over and replay a memory, the less reliable it becomes. Your brain overwrites things, and it changes incrementally over time. I heard it put best in the sci-fi show The Expanse, when a guy says, every time you remember something, your mind changes it just a little, until your best and your worst memories are your biggest illusions. So I know that's a fact, but I have this memory that has since been deemed as traumatic. It's very detailed, about a thing that definitely happened in front of me, and it's incredibly vivid. But just this last week, I was able to ask someone who was there and an adult at the time how they remembered it. He was a cop, and basically a professional witness, and broke down a little about how he avoids fuzzing up memories like that. But if his recollection is more reliable, then I have made up whole extra scenes that did not happen, and that really bothers me. What happened, short version, was my uncle got stabbed in the gut in my front yard with a carving knife when I was 7 to 8, a few feet from me. He had yelled at a car that went speeding down our residential street, doing over double the speed limit. The guy came back 10 minutes later, with the knife in his back pocket. My uncle was a knucklehead, fresh out of the USMC, though he was reasonably also concerned that this guy pulled up like that with me and another cousin playing right there in the yard and basically was moving to be between us and him. Anyway, when they got close, the guy pulled a knife and stuck him right in the gut. Almost killed him, but didn't quite. All of this happened on the driveway, and the guy sped off right after, and other adults came out of the house and took care of my uncle until the ambulance showed up. My uncle never left the driveway, and was lying on the curb when the ambulance showed up, but I remember this whole extra scene in which my dad and my uncle had to carry him into the house and put him on the bed, and my mother was doing first aid, etc. I remember them seeing me and my cousin standing there and sending us over to the neighbor's house. We were sent next door, but right there from the yard, and it's not a big deal, but the memory of what didn't happen is so vivid, and so are the parts that did happen. I can remember the Star Wars figure in my hand, Walrus Man. For the curious, seeing the guy reach for the knife in the split second I knew my uncle didn't see it. I remember my dad chasing the car with a grip on the guy driving as he took off, and one of his flip-flops flying through the air when it came off. But that whole procession into the house. Utter bullshit, but every bit as detailed as the parts I was able to confirm. 100% true story. Kinda long, so I'll do my best to make it short. I grew up in a very conservative Catholic household. Church and Sunday school. I have one older sister and 4 brothers. This story I'm going to tell took place when I was a little boy. My sister was terrible, mean, and a bully. She never let any of us near her room. One day my sister wasn't home and my grandma was occupied. I was so curious about my sister's room because I had never seen it. I go snooping. Wasn't really looking for anything in particular, just seeing what there is to see. I was curious as to what her view out her window looked like. She had a tall window that overlooked the pool and blue blinds. I peeked between the blinds to get a glimpse of the pool. I should mention it is broad daylight, when suddenly I see a very scantily clad female figure saunter down the pool side. I could not see her upper half. She walked towards the window, turned around and sashayed away. I was stunned. I didn't know what I was looking at, but I knew this figure was inappropriately dressed and it wasn't one of the 2 women who lived in the house. As an adult, I recognized the outfit of the figure to be similar to the lower half of a burlesque dancer. Fishnets, black pumps, and a tight one-piece with flare at the hips. I was around 5 years/0 at the time, give or take a year, and my sister was only 6 years older than me. It obviously was not her. It was clearly not my grandma either. After I saw the figure, I ran out of my sister's room. I would think about it from time to time, but I never said anything because strict family and I was snooping. Some time passes, perhaps months or years. It was a long time ago. But I had another chance to explore my sister's room. It was under similar circumstances as the first time I went snooping. This was only the second time I had ever seen my sister's room. As I approach her room, I remember the lady I saw last time, and I remember thinking that I was probably just seeing things. I walk in, look around, note some changes and head to the window. I peek through the blinds, and may God strike me if I did not see the same figure, walking the same way, wearing the same outfit, and disappearing the same way without me seeing her face. I was overcome with fear. I felt my face go cold and I rushed out of my sister's room. To this very day I have absolutely no clue who or what I saw walking in my grandmother's backyard. I have no explanation, I have theories other than it was a ghost. This is why I 100% believe in ghosts and spirits. How I got home when I was 3. I was at the park near a school with my great aunts and my brothers. I got bored after a while and told my aunts I wanted to go home. They said that we were going home very soon. Me, being 3 and a brat, decided to walk home by myself. I remembered how we got to the park, so I decided to go back without telling anyone. As I was walking, I remembered walking across a particularly busy intersection. There was a massive red truck that I walked in front of. I walk up the block to my house, and walk in through the front door. Entire trip took under 5 minutes tops. My mother sees me and is extremely confused. She kept asking how I got home and I told her that I walked. This seemed to confuse her more, and she didn't understand how I got there. My aunts call panicked because they can't find me. My mom tells them that I am home, and all is well. Still, everyone is confused. I forgot about this memory until years later. And when I remembered, I was just as confused. Why? There was no park 5 minutes from my house. It would be 10 blocks, and a 3-year-old couldn't have walked that so quickly. There was also no major street that I would have to cross, I would have been walking alongside it. But I was at the park with my family that day. To this day, no one knows how I got home. It shouldn't have been possible for me to get home so quickly. There was no park in the location that I was describing. The story stays the same, but none of it is possible. Somehow, I crossed a street that didn't exist in under 5 minutes when it should have taken me much longer. I will never know how I got home. But I would like to. I found a phone in a parking lot half hidden between a couple of cars. I picked it up, found out it was flat, and took it home to charge it. After I charged it, I called the last number on it. A young woman answered it eventually. She was pretty abrupt with her greeting, but I just went on to explain that I found the phone and wanted to return it to its owner. She broke down crying and explained that on her end, the number came up as Dad. Her dad had died 2 months prior and she couldn't figure out how his phone ended up in a parking lot in a neighboring city. Circa 2007, my brother and I were heading home from a night out. We were on a freeway interchange that had a large drop-off to the right. The drop was down a hill at least 15 to 20 feet. In front of us a black SUV started spinning out of control and tumbled off the side. "Pull over," I shouted to my brother. "No way. We've been drinking," he replied. I convinced him whoever was in the crash was going to be really disoriented and more than likely severely injured. It was for the best someone was there to try to keep them calm and to not move until help arrived. "As soon as you see the siren lights, honk. I'll run up and we'll get out of here," I said, and my brother nodded. I flew down the hill as fast as I could. The SUV had landed on its tires. All of the glass was shattered. In the driver's seat was a man, disoriented and covered in blood. He was speaking in his native tongue. I knew a little bit myself, fortunately. Enough to tell him an ambulance was on his way and that he needed to stay still. He was panicked. Fear-stricken. Not the kind that one experiences during a car crash. He was afraid of something else. I could see it in his eyes as they bugged out from his face. That was when I noticed the blood he was covered in was dry. "What have you done?" I asked in his language. The man just stared at me, unable to form words but pleading with me through his eyes. "Honk. Honk." I looked up to see my brother signaling me and I saw lights in the distance. "Just stay here," I said to the man and ran back up the hill, jumped in my brother's car and we bolted out of there. This very much reads like a made-up story, I understand. It's probably because I have a flair for the dramatic, but I swear this truly happened to me one night in 2007 and I always think about it to this day. I'll never know the truth. This happened last month so it's pretty fresh, but it bothers me. A couple weeks ago I was driving to campus and passed someone I know walking the opposite direction. We were on the outskirts of campus so it wasn't crazy far. I parked my car and walk into campus and they somehow passed me going the opposite direction again. Google Maps shows it's a 20+ minute walk from where I saw them while driving to where I saw them on campus, but it was barely 10 minutes apart. My guess is that someone picked them up and dropped them off super close to that building, but them coming from opposite my direction, towards where I first saw them, threw me off. When I was growing up, my dad always blamed stuff on the family poltergeist as a joke. He mainly did it because it's a fun name to say. Fast forward years later, and there's a lot of weird and unexplainable things that have happened. Enough has happened that I'm left wondering if there really is a poltergeist. One of the weirdest details is the fact that our doorbell goes off randomly. Our doorbell is a set of chimes, and only one note plays when that happens. There is never any regular timing for this, and it happened once as a direct response when my sister flipped it off. Electricians have looked at it and told us that nothing should be happening. They told us they fixed it, and it still happens to this day. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.